We here today are to talk about how to build a crisis-tolerant company culture. And I'm going to share a 5-step process with you. And this process and this presentation is brought to you by Changing Paces. We're going to start with a quote. We should never assume that accessibility is someone else's problem. In the end, we're all in this together, because accessibility is a basic human right and it benefits everyone. And that's brought to us by Eve Anderson, Head of Accessibility at Google. We do love Google. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me during this difficult time. We've all been impacted by this global pandemic in one way or another. But the reality for most business owners is that revenue is either significantly down or dried up completely, and we're not sure how long the recovery from COVID-19 is going to take. With most businesses moving online for survival, there's been a huge learning curve for many. But for those of us who've been working online for decades already, the adjustment has been far more doable than most. While this crisis has been devastating for the hundreds of thousands, probably at this point, I'm sure, that have lost senior members, I'm grateful to say there's been much good that's come out of it as well. The new reality that stands out the most for me is how people everywhere are reaching out to their fellow human beings to provide support. That alone has given me a warm feeling that I can't even begin to describe, but there's also a deeper sense of gratitude that's coming with it, for me. So now that you've seen my inner heart, my name is Trish Robichaud, and I'm a work-life inclusion coach, accessibility compliance consultant, and motivational speaker. And I live and work with multiple disabilities. I was diagnosed with major depression in my 20s, multiple sclerosis in my 30s, significant heart disease that required a quadruple bypass in my 40s, and, of all things, bipolar disorder in my 50s. In my 30s, I actually lost my job and a 12-year career as a result of sick time I'd racked up leading to my MS diagnosis. Since then, I've made it my mission to bring disability out of the darkness and create a more welcoming world for people of all abilities. Thankfully, I'm blessed to be quite resilient, an eternal optimist, and a die-hard problem solver, with an affinity for finding or creating elusive solutions. This has served me very well personally and as a coach. I've now been coaching people with disabilities on work, life, and business issues for almost 25 years, and training and consulting for organizations on how to interact with clients, customers, and employees with disabilities for 15 years. I'm passionate about my work and my client success, and I'm living proof that that life with disability does not preclude the achievement of professional fulfillment. This webinar is intended to challenge preconceived notions and unconscious biases. It's meant to be highly engaging, so feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat box either during or at the end of the presentation. I'll answer them all after the webinar. The chat box can be found by hovering over the More button at the right end of the button bar at the bottom of the Zoom window. Okay, there's a black bar at the bottom of the Zoom window, and at the right end, you'll see the More button. To be transparent up front, while I will be giving you takeaways today that you can implement right away, at the end of this webinar, I'm going to make you an offer to provide you with the help you need to accomplish our 5-step process faster and easier than you'd ever manage on your own. A little housekeeping before we start. So you know, this webinar is being recorded for playback at your convenience. You'll receive a link to our YouTube channel by email later today or tomorrow. The playback, excuse me, the playback should be at the top of the playlist. Also, if my video feed during this presentation is covering something that you want to be able to see underneath of it, just click on my image and drag it off to the side to a free area. Okay, getting started. Our objective here today is to share untapped profitability. our 5-step process for increasing profits by hiring people with disabilities. And those 5 steps to increasing profit are: number 1, embracing the benefits of disability at work. Number 2, building an inclusive company culture. Number 3, creating an accessible workplace. 4, providing accessible customer service. And number 5, employing people with disabilities. Starting with step number 1. Embracing the benefits of disability at work includes looking at the human potential of people with disabilities, the financial benefits of employing people with disabilities, and the cultural shift that will happen when you do. Please note that each of the 5 steps I'm going to cover in this webinar today require a series of initiatives to be undertaken to ensure full inclusion and compliance with disability legislation. For example, here in Ontario, we have the AODA, which is the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. For the sake of brevity, I'm going to keep the coverage of these initiatives to a minimum. It's the 5 steps themselves that are the main takeaway here. Of course, the complete toolkit, best practices, and sample forms will be included in the program I'm going to tell you about at the end. Okay, in terms of step number 1, we talked about human potential. First, let's look at the solution for our current skilled labor shortage. Okay, pre-COVID, Stats Canada told us that here in Ontario, the employment rate pre-COVID for people with disabilities was only 58% compared to the 81% for people without disabilities, again, pre-COVID. With 2.6 million Ontarians living with a disability, which is roughly a quarter of our population, and 50% of those having post-secondary education credentials, we have an enormous pool of untapped talent, over 500,000 people in fact. And I have no doubt that those numbers are relatively representative of whatever country you live in. Now, other terms, also in terms of human potential. This ad features Amy Mullins, a Paralympic athlete, actor, model, and advocate. The campaign was run by fashion house Kenneth Cole with the tagline, 25 years of non-uniform thinking. Amy was born with a medical condition requiring amputation of both her lower legs at 1 year old. This first photo shows her high fashion posture wearing 2 dress prostheses. Prosthetic devices have improved dramatically in recent decades, so that wearers are not disabled anymore, but rather, like Amy, can be capable of running competitively in world-class events. We share Amy's story with you to illustrate the human potential behind one woman who has been seemingly disabled since near birth. Given the motivation and the right technology or other adaptation, anything is possible for people with disabilities. We all have the potential, we all have the human potential to make the world a better place. So why do companies hold back? Many companies avoid targeting active inclusion of people with disabilities because they actually incorrectly assume that it's going to cost them more money than the average employee. Or they assume that it will require complex expertise. But multiple studies show that this is not the case. Specific expertise or training is simply not required. Yet still many people will not hire out of ignorance and many times fear. Fear of the unknown, really, for many. The reality is that nearly 60% of accommodations cost nothing, while the rest average around $500 per person with a disability. Being mindful of accommodation from the start can also help companies avoid extra costs. For example, consider adding accessibility features right away and making flexible working hours and diversity training part of your workplace culture. Because everyone is an individual and has unique needs, rather than assuming they'll need complex accommodations, the best way to serve any of your employees is simply to ask what they need from you and deliver on those needs to the best of your ability. Be a leader in your organization and encourage people to reconsider outdated processes and thinking. Sometimes there's an unrecognized bias amongst hiring managers. Their jobs will not be harder if they hire someone who works a little differently. On the contrary, there are actually a number of clear benefits. In fact, a 2017 study by Deloitte shows that diverse and inclusive workplaces are 2 times more likely to meet or exceed financial targets, 6 times more likely to be innovative, and 6 times more likely to effectively anticipate change. Key financial benefits. A recent 4-year study by Accenture found that companies that fully embraced disability inclusion had 28% higher revenue, double the net income, and a 30% higher profit margin than those who didn't. This makes disability in the workplace a huge advantage for businesses. Can you really afford to leave that much cash on the table? Now let's take a closer look at those numbers and crunch them for yourselves. If, for example, we had a non-inclusive business, a business owner who has not thought at all planned for accessibility, or we'll call them business A. All right, let's say business A has a revenue of $500,000 and their cost of goods is sold is $300,000. That of course makes their gross profit $200,000, giving them a profit margin of 40%, which is the 200 over the 500. Now let's look at the potential for a fully inclusive business, and we'll call them business B. If their revenue were 28% higher than business A, as stated in that last study that I mentioned, where businesses had 28% higher revenue, okay, that would give business B $140,000 in growth over business A. All right, we're going to break that down and you'll see the numbers in another way. All right. If we have as our study also says, if we have a 30% higher profit margin than business A, that would make a 52% profit margin for business B, which is an increase of $132,000 in gross profits for business B over the $200,000 that business A did. Wow. Gross profit increase of $132,800. It seems that including people with disabilities in your business model should be well worth the return on investment, wouldn't you say? You don't know what the investment is yet. Okay, we'll get there, promise. All right, what about the cultural shift? We've talked about the financial benefits of hiring people with disabilities, but what about a company's culture of benefits? And why in the world does hiring people with disabilities increase profitability anyway? First, turnover is lower because people with disabilities tend to stay with a company because it's hard to find a job when you have a disability, so we are far less likely to quit when faced with challenges. Every business owner knows the financial and productivity costs connected with having to replace yet another employee who's given you their notice. Productivity can increase because people with disabilities often have knowledge of assistive technology and other innovations. We're used to finding new ways of doing things. We also make good team players because we're accustomed to collaborating with others to see that our needs are met. Other benefits of hiring people with disabilities include improvements in profitability, like attendance and punctuality, improved employee morale, positive company image, and lower health and safety costs. So why are health and safety costs lower, you might wonder? Because people with disabilities, generally speaking, are less likely to take risks. Organizations that are inclusive see a competitive advantage as in diverse customers. Customer and employee loyalty and satisfaction, innovation, elevated work ethics, inclusive work culture, and ability awareness. Secondary benefits for people with disabilities include improved quality of life and income, enhanced self-confidence, expanded social network, and a sense of community. Step number 2, building an inclusive company culture involves, again, among other things, policy development, accessibility planning, and compliance reporting where necessary. It also involves making websites accessible and creating accessible documents and communications. With our recent move to working online from home because of COVID, businesses are now more prepared than ever to accommodate people with disabilities. What was once seen as an undue hardship, setting up employees to work virtually, is now regarded as business as usual. This is just one example of how learning to accommodate employees with disabilities can ultimately benefit everyone in the organization. In terms of policy development, planning, and reporting, all organizations are required to develop, implement, and maintain accessibility policies and accessible customer service policies. In addition, large organizations, which have 50 or more employees, they are required to document their accessibility and customer service policies and post them online. They're required to develop a statement of organizational commitment to those policies and to develop, implement, maintain, and document a multi-year accessibility plan. In terms of reporting, large organizations are required to report on the status, report on the full status of their legal legislative compliance, while only small businesses, employers with 20 to 49 employees, they are only required to report on their customer service requirements. As business owners, you have the flexibility to create policies and practices that best fit your existing work culture and business practices, as long as they meet the needs of people with disabilities. While small businesses may not be required to document their accessible customer service policies, it's important that your policy is clearly defined and communicated to all staff, even if it's not on paper. When we look at making websites accessible, there are generally 3 different approaches that accessibility firms take. The first is traditional code remediation, which is the most expensive and takes the longest, but it is the most highly regarded among people who are screen reader users, and those will be people with visual disabilities. Next, we have overlays, which are the least expensive and will be done the quickest. And finally, we have hybrids that sit in the middle on money and time for implementation. Each type of approach has its pros and cons. Website and web content accessibility is required for large organizations by January 1st, 2021 here in Ontario. Small and medium-sized businesses are not required to have an accessible website at this stage of the legislative development. But given that those small and medium-sized businesses make up the vast majority of businesses in Ontario, that makes for a whole lot of inaccessible websites. So in honor of people with disabilities across the globe and best practices for inclusive companies, we have uncovered a solution. Introducing Accessibility, which is an overlay with an AI or artificial intelligence working at the back end. In fact, it's the first web accessibility platform on the planet to use AI to modify inaccessible web coding on the fly. This is the interface that just popped up. It provides you features that change the font type, the size of the font, the color theme, as well as many, many other functions. It's WCAG and legislative compliant, and it's simple, automatic, and affordable. It installs with one string, a single string of code, and takes you into compliance within 48 hours. Accessibility starts at $4.90 per year for up to a 1,000-page website. PDF and audio video remediation are priced extra. When the software rescans, then the software rescans the site every 48 hours to spot recent updates to the content. And it even comes with its own website accessibility statement. Now, when creating any kind of digital content or communications, there are a few key functions that must be used in order to ensure your content is accessible. These key traits required for accessibility are the same regardless of whether your document is an HTML, a Microsoft Word, an Adobe PDF, or any other document format. First off, we're expected to use headings, which means instead of just making your heading or your title bold or larger, actually use the styles function in your word processor to name that title a title or name that heading a heading. All right. Next we are to use bulleted lists. So not just creating a list of words one on top of another, but actually using bullets tells the software to tell the reader that this is a bulleted list. Okay. Next, we need to use descriptive hyperlinks. That means to make our hyperlinks meaningful. So instead of just using click here as your hyperlink, use click here to download file. So that way I know why I'm clicking here and what I'm clicking to, if possible. Okay. Next, we talk about alt text, which means we add descriptions to images so that when a screen reader runs across an image, they get a description of that image. The best thing though is not just the screen readers get the description of the image, but it's also beneficial for search engine optimization by maximizing your web presence by using descriptions of your images so that crawlers, web bots can actually index your content fully. Next, it's important to indicate your language in your document, and every web processor has a function to do that. Then we're going to use tables wisely because we have to use cell titles both at the top for columns and at the left for rows. And then finally, it's important to understand how to export files from one format to another. Step number 3, creating an accessible workplace. And this includes, but is not limited to, looking at your office, your store, and your facility accessibility, and examining the accessibility of self-serve kiosks. All right, first we're going to talk about your office, store, facility accessibility. In addition to the building and worksite codes that builders must comply with, areas in which accessibility must be provided may include, but are not limited to, these examples: entrances and exits, restrooms, accessible parking spaces, service counters, waiting areas, and conference rooms or shared workspaces. Something to note here is that because of COVID-19, we're currently taking all kinds of actions to make interacting accessible and safe for everyone. The example that comes to mind for me is how whenever you go out now for essential services, you find tape on the floor marking social distances, or to try and help people see where they need to go. Wouldn't that be beneficial in non-crisis times to show people where the stairs or the washrooms are? Another example of how a strategy to accommodate people with illness, in this case, as opposed to disability, can benefit everyone. Self-serve kiosks. While the government and public sector organizations are to incorporate accessibility features when designing, procuring, or acquiring self-serve kiosks, large and small businesses and nonprofit organizations shall have regard for accessibility for persons with disabilities when designing, procuring, or acquiring self-service kiosks. And a kiosk, so the distinction between the two is government and public sector, they have to incorporate accessibility features, whereas private sector and nonprofits shall have regard. So we're asked to think about these things, okay, and take them into consideration. A kiosk is an interactive electronic terminal, including a point-of-sale device intended for public use that allows users to access one or more services or products or both. Step number 4, providing accessible customer service. This involves, again, includes the following, but not limited to. Number 1, we're talking about training your staff on making customer service accessible to people with disabilities. Next, creating an accessible feedback system and making it available to the public. And welcoming and accommodating service animals and support persons. As an example of the kind of topics to cover when training your staff, we've got a humorous video here to show you. It was produced by the DC government.
Morning, Mom. Morning there. Man. Morning, Alice! There's no need to be awkward. Poor Bob. Like so many of us, he just doesn't know how to interact with people with disabilities. It's pretty easy, really. People with disabilities are people first.
We need the same things that every person needs, like respect.
Good morning, everyone. Attention!
Okay. Maybe we need to be more specific.
The easiest way to show respect is to focus on the person, not the disability. It's okay. You'll get the hang of it.
One easy way to focus on the person is to watch the person signing and not their interpreter.
Or their companion.
It's really cool that you'd like to help, but do us both a favor and please ask me first. What you think might be helping? I got you. Wait, put it up!
Oh no, might actually not. If you'd like to offer me help, let me hold on to your elbow. Don't take mine.
Hey, would you like to take my arm?
Sure.
Assistive devices help us to live our lives. They're really important and really personal.
Grabbing the mower makes it weird for everyone.
But please only touch our devices and service animals if we've given you permission. And don't take it personally if I ask you not to. Remember that my service animal helps me all the time. Neither of us would like it if we were separated.
Remember, we make our own decisions. We sign documents, vote, volunteer, work, and pay taxes.
We get married.
So don't listen to me just because I look smile.
Just because I'm blind does not mean I'm deaf.
Just because I'm deaf doesn't mean I'm blind.
And just because I use a wheelchair doesn't mean that I can't sweep you off your feet.
So take a deep breath, relax. We don't fight.
Unless we're really hungry.
Hello, ladies, how are you?
And if you're not sure what to do, just ask.
Hi, would you still like to see a menu?
No thanks, but can you please read it to me?
Sure, definitely.
Just treat us the way you would want to be treated, and we'll all be okay.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning, Alice.
Awkward no more. Nice job, Bob. Go forth and be human.
There's no need to be awkward.
Awesome. Thank you very much to the DC government. Fabulous. All righty. Step number 5. And this is the peak, the crescendo, the climax of our system, where we actually begin employing people with disabilities. The first 4 steps are preparing us to get here. Employing people with disabilities includes the following, but covers a fair bit more as well. We're going to keep it brief here, but these are the key points. All right. The first is encouraging self-identification, which we're going to cover in the next video. And recruiting and interviewing people with disabilities, where to find them, and what do we have to do differently for interviewing, or what do we need to enhance our interviews so they're inclusive for people of all abilities, okay? And what practices do we need to adopt for retention and ensuring retention and providing advancement opportunities? All right. The next video comes to us by PepsiCo, and it is another fabulous example of education.
Been with PepsiCo for coming up on 5 years now. Work on the fountain line, do everything from side graphics, new valves, new lines, hoses, make it the beautiful machines that you guys see when you go have dinner at night with your family.
I'm an administrator, and I make sure the building runs, pay all the bills and everything like that. I've been here 22 years. I'm on the downward fall now. I'm going towards the 40 years.
I've been with Frito-Lay for about 13 years. I'm a pre-pick picker, and I basically work on the module. You have to be quick. You've got so many bags you need to pick. You have lots of orders, and you need to make sure you get them all.
The normal thing for me is I go out there on the floor, see how my guys are doing, see how everything's going, and make sure my guys have their work orders and I know what they're doing for the day.
I am an HR specialist, and so what I do is I design surveys to really get at what our business leaders want to know about our employees and how they're feeling.
I've been with PepsiCo almost 9 years, and I am currently in supply chain finance, supporting the warehouse function.
I'm the senior market director in the state of Indiana. I've been with the company for 34 years.
I have a disability called achromatopsia. I'm considered blind. I'm really susceptible to light. I can't see very well in light either. So, yes, it is, but it's fine. I can't even see your face.
Sensitive, I knew you, hearing loss.
I have multiple sclerosis.
I'm at a great news week.
I'm a type 1 diabetic.
Our son has Angelman syndrome.
A mother of a child with dyslexia. What they're looking at may not be what they think that they see, that there's something that goes on underneath all of our skins.
You saying hi to him, he likes you.
Some of the challenge is the unknown. The atypical days are the days when he has seizure episodes. It's a horrible situation for any family to deal with or person to deal with, because it's really the edge of death.
I found out that I had my disability when I was 5. My mom sat me down. She said, I want to let you know that you have a disease called achromatopsia. You can't see, you're blind, and you can't see color. I told her, no, you're wrong. And she told me, well, what color is this? And slides me over a toy. I told her it's green. No, it's not, Candace, it's not green.
I don't have the coordination or the balance. It's more of a neurological disease, like an extension cord plugs into the wall, which would be my brain. The cord might be frayed, and you won't get a great connection. My connection doesn't go towards my body.
I was about 6 or 7 years old when I came down with scarlet fever. I've lost approximately about 50% of my hearing. At this point, I'm down to maybe like 30% of my hearing.
I was in 2nd grade and I started to cry during a math test because I could no longer see the numbers on the page. They were blurry. And that was because my blood sugar was so high that it began to put pressure on my optic nerves, and so it was messing with my vision. Sometimes having a disability, especially an invisible disability, you can sort of feel isolated and like no one knows what you're going through every day.
In 2002, I joined the military, and during one of my deployments while I was in the Army, I was injured, got hit in the head. My back is in all kinds of shambles, and I do have PTSD from that incident.
The support that we have received from PepsiCo is vast and comprehensive.
When I first applied for this role with PepsiCo, first thing out of my mouth was, I said, are you sure that you want to put a territory in the hands of someone that cannot pick up a phone and put a fire out like that? And my boss says, we'll make it work. We'll figure it out.
They're going to help you. You need things printed bigger. You need things signed to, whatever it may be that you need. It's going to be there for you. And no one's going to hold it against you if you need a little bit of help.
Disabled employees and caregivers are welcome and are vital to our business and future growth. Self-identification is important, so the company knows how well we're serving our associates with disabilities. 1 in 5 working-age Americans has a condition that qualifies as a disability. Disability reaches all ages, all races, and your gender doesn't matter. The term disability includes a vast array of conditions. 70% or more hidden disabilities mean these conditions are not visible to others.
I would say absolutely self-identify. There's absolutely no reason for you not to. I acknowledge my disability as part of who I am.
A little bit of a weight was lifted the day that I did tell my manager for the first time. It was great to feel like she knew who I was as an employee.
Make sure that there's very open dialogue and transparency.
Let them know that, even though you do have a disability, you still can be productive and you can be part of the team and help get things done from day to day.
Associates with disabilities, like any of our associates, are integral members of our big PepsiCo family. We take pride that diversity is in our DNA. That's the PepsiCo way, and it's how each and every associate is treated.
I love my job.
I mean, I wouldn't want to work anywhere else. They don't treat me any different. They treat me as just Brian.
It's about bringing my full self to work.
It's huge to have a voice. You're the only you.
To all our associates with disabilities and anyone who is a caregiver for a person with a disability, I simply want to say this: you belong here at PepsiCo. You make us a faster, stronger, better company. So please, take the time to self-identify through the MyHR system. and we will continue doing everything we can to support you and encourage more people with disabilities to join the PepsiCo team.
Thank you, PepsiCo. That was awesome. Again, really well produced video. Alrighty, so that takes us to our review. Just a quick review. My objective today was to share with you Untapped Profitability, our 5-step process for increasing profits by hiring people with disabilities. And those steps include step 1, embracing the benefits of disability at work, educating your management, educating your team. Step number 2, building an inclusive company culture. Number 3, creating an accessible workplace. Number 4, providing accessible customer service. And number 5, employing people with disabilities. Now that you've got an idea of what's involved with legislative compliance, how would you like to implement untapped profitability with far greater ease than you would on your own? What if I told you that with the support of my legislative and accessibility expertise, you could have a significant portion of your legal requirements fulfilled within 90 days, and you should be seeing a return on your investment in 12 to 24 months, post-COVID, that is. One of our featured clients is Sunwing Airlines, and this is what they had to say about us. We did a recent project for Sunwing last year. We built a training program, an online training program for their employees on how to support travelers with disabilities in the air travel experience. It was powerful and a lot of fun, and I thank you very much for the feedback. Fabulous. Thank you, Sunwing. And that brings us to my offer for today. The Untapped Profitability Program. Is your small to mid-sized business fully compliant with disability legislation yet? I've shown you here today that the benefits far outweigh the costs. Compliance can be easier and more compelling than you think. In 10 weekly webinars, we'll walk you through learning and implementing our 5-step compliance process, from how to recruit and hire people with disabilities to celebrating an inclusive company culture and enjoying increased profitability. It starts on September 16th and runs to November 18th, 2020. As I've shared with you today, hiring people with disability has been proven to reduce turnover, increase customer and employee loyalty, reduce health and safety costs, double net income, and boost profit margins by 30%. We crunched those numbers with a sample annual revenue of $500,000 to start. We ended up with an additional $132,000 in gross profit. Can you afford to ignore that potential increase in earnings? Consider those numbers against your current revenue and see if your potential growth would be a healthy return on your investment of the cost of our program. $8,000, or 3 payments of $2,800 apiece. Now is the time to get started for the sake of your bottom line. With this program, you'll get access to 10 training and implementation webinars, 60 to 90 minutes each, video recordings of each of the 10 sessions for mobile playback, audio recordings of each of the 10 sessions for listen and learn, transcripts of each of the 10 sessions, and assignments for each of the 5 steps, and PowerPoints for each of the 5 steps. Your takeaways and your benefits would include, they're extensive, but here's a short list. Clear strategies for achieving legislative compliance. Templates for every document you need to be facilitating accessible employment practices. A new level of appreciation for the customer service needs of people with different types of disabilities. Resources for finding job candidates with disabilities. You'll walk away with the know-how and confidence to fully engage with employees and customers with disabilities. You'll have our 5-step formula for increasing profitability and the comfort level of knowing when disability-related issues arrive, you have an expert on your team. What else? What else might you be wondering? Well, we've got a couple of bonuses for you. What else indeed? As our first bonus, we're going to set up your website to be fully accessible according to WCAG 2.1, the global standards for website accessibility. With Accessibility, our AI-powered website accessibility overlay, which is automatic, simple, and affordable. And your first year's annual cost for a site of up to 1,000 pages is included in the cost of the program. Then finally, there's the optional super bonus. We're going to provide further group coaching implementation for 3 months after the new year to provide you with support on any disability or accessibility related issues. Those sessions will be every other week from January 6th to March 31st. All that for one payment of $8,000 or 3 payments of $2,800. I encourage you to measure the cost of the program against the value of saving on non-compliance penalty fees of up to $100,000 per day. Again, I encourage you not to leave that money on the table. But wait, there's one more thing we want to do for you, just because we're all struggling during this history-making global pandemic. We've created a COVID-19 discount. If you act now, or by the end of the day, May 15, 2020, we're offering a 25% or $2,000 discount on the program price just for your attendance today, bringing your investment down to $59.97 or 3 payments of $20.97 each. Or 3 payments of $20.97 each. Imagine a boost in income, disability legislation compliance, and making a social impact. It's a win-win-win. How can you argue with that? And here we have some feedback from another of our featured clients, Accenture, which is a global leader in business management and organizational development consulting. We were asked to deliver some training to their staff, and in response, we created a workshop on barriers, identifying barriers, and accommodations to respond to those barriers. And we did it in a game show format. It was so much fun. Everybody had a blast, lots of laughs, and we all learned a great deal. All right. Thank you so much, Accenture, for the feedback. We appreciate you taking the time. Thank you all for joining us for this out of the ordinary webinar that has a huge potential for your business. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and my delivery. Again, if you're interested in our untapped profitability program and increasing profit by hiring people with disabilities, be sure to email me by the end of business on May 15th, this week, to take advantage of the $2,000 discount offer. If you'd like to chat with me before you make a decision, please feel free to call me and we'll have that conversation. I look forward to hearing from you so that we can plan that win-win-win for your business. In the interim, stay home, stay safe, and God bless. Thank you again.